Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So today's episode will be demystifying the human psyche. We'll also be discussing the psychotic mind. We'll discuss psychiatry and the many misconceptions that are connected to both psychiatry, psychosis, and different treatments and remedies available for psychosis and mental health. Now, joining us to do so is our smart guest, Jerry Merzinsky. And you can see another guest here with us, Anon, who's going to share his story. So I'd like to go ahead and welcome you both. Welcome back, Jerry and Anon. How are you both doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Doing very well, thank you.
Okay, so to just lay the foundation, I'd like to invite Jerry to just, Jerry, we have some listeners who still have a different mindset as to what psychiatry is, psychosis is. So just to lay the foundation, with your background and your work, could you tell us how you define psychosis, the psychotic mind, and the misconceptions that are connected to it? And then I'll let you take the wheel.
Well, that's a big order. Well, psychosis, what they call is what schizophrenia means is split mind. So that's about the closest psychiatry has ever gotten to the real thing, that what's actually happening. It's what they consider it is a break from standard reality. So you break away from the same reality that everybody else has, and you're experiencing a different reality. Now, psychiatry calls that psychosis. They call the symptoms of it hallucinations, and there's two kinds of hallucinations. There's audio hallucinations and visual hallucinations, right? Both of which don't belong to the normal set of what we consider reality. So what I found after graduate school, I went to work at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. There was close to 10,000 patients there when I got there. And nothing in my educational background prepared me for what I was getting into. I mean, I was fascinated with abnormal psychology. I loved it in graduate school. It was great. And I'm like, what causes all this? Because the DSM, their Bible of mental illnesses, only describes mental illnesses. It doesn't say anything about what causes them. So I entered that hospital and ran into all kinds of different mental illnesses, but the most prevalent one that we could work with was schizophrenia, which is a form of psychosis. And the most prevalent was paranoid schizophrenia, where the person hears voices. Right? Now, what I thought coming out of graduate school was that the voices were like, what do you call it, word salad. They didn't make any sense. It was like babbling or something like that. That's not what I saw. I saw patients walking around having arguments with their voices, having conversations with their voices, listening to their voices and getting in trouble. There was one lady that was arguing with her voices that she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds, and the voices were convincing her to leave the hospital. And she was walking off the hospital ground while she was arguing with her voices. So I'm like, what are these things? And I wasn't quite sure, and I didn't know what they were telling these patients, but what I did know is if they listened to them, they got into trouble. They either got into fights, or they did stupid stuff, or they attacked people, or they did crazy stuff. And there was a one-to-one correspondence between them listening to these things and their behavior. Okay? So I started asking staff, well, what are the voices? And the consistent answer was they're hallucinations. And there was no answer. They were. What were they saying? What were they telling these patients? none of them were the least bit interested in what the voices were telling these patients. I mean, here they were for decades working at the hospital. They had no curiosity about what the voices were telling these patients, and they didn't know. They were taught in school that they're hallucinations, and there was no evidence for that whatsoever, other than they looked like hallucinations. There wasn't any research on them. It was like the gods of psychiatry, like the ancient Egyptian priests, just went, "We hereby declare that these voices are hallucinations because we said so." There was no evidence other than they looked like hallucinations. They didn't make any sense. They told the person to do crazy stuff, and I never saw a psychiatrist ask what the voices were telling them. So nobody seemed to know what the voices were telling these people. So I started asking them, and I kept asking them and asking them. There's no shortage of schizophrenics at the state hospital. There were plenty to work with. So it took me about a year to figure out how to talk to them, because there is no benefit for a schizophrenic to tell anybody about their voices. They lose friends. They go, "You're possessed." Their friends leave. They freak people out. They scare people with the voices. They tell their parents or their guardians, and they go, "Well, we got to take you to a psychiatrist." They go to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, "You're mentally ill. You have to take these toxic tranquilizers for the rest of your life. There is no cure." So, and those medicines have awful side effects. So there's really no real benefit to the schizophrenic to tell people about the voices, because it's always a bad scenario. So what I would do is I'd get piece by piece. It took me a year to get a couple of pieces. I would ask them, "Okay, I know this much about the voices. Can you tell me more?" And they saw that well, first of all, they were afraid of psychologists and psychiatrists, because our job technically was to keep an eye on them, and if they were getting out of line, to turn them into psychiatry who would drug them. Right? So they didn't trust either psychology or psychiatry. So they didn't want to talk to us about the voices. When I had a handful of pieces, they saw that I was serious about wanting to know what these voices were, and they would tell me more. And each time I got a piece, it kind of increased my little bankroll of these traits that I was learning about these things. And these people would say, "Well, yeah, he's serious. He wants to learn. He really wants to know what's going on. He's not like the rest of them that just want to drug us," and that kind of stuff. So the more questions I asked, the clearer it became that these voices were running patterns. Okay? And if they were running patterns, they couldn't be hallucinations. So that flew in the face of psychiatry. So it was pattern after pattern after pattern came up. By the time I was done at the end of my career, there were 23 patterns that we discovered. But the first I discovered was negativity. These things were consistently derogatory, insulting, abusive, destructive, and although they might come across like, "Hey, we're going to help you, we got special powers we can give you," and they tried to get the trust of the patient. Once they did that, they just ran rampant. They took over. So they would invariably turn on the patient and start attacking them once they got their trust, and the patient started listening to them. Right? Mm-hmm. That was a consistent trait. So I went, why aren't they random like hallucinations? I mean, hallucinations are all over the place, and I've seen them several times working in the ER and at the hospitals I worked at. The hallucinations are all over the place. They're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're just crazy. They're all over the place. They're unpredictable. This was predictable. Every single schizophrenic I talked to told me the hallucinations were negative and derogatory. What was it that held them on that path? Why didn't they go random like all other hallucinations? There was some force holding them to that negative path where they didn't wander from that. They stayed there. So that got my curiosity up. Then maybe a year or two later, I had a patient come in and told me, "Well, when I read the 23rd Psalm, the voices react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan." And I found that interesting. So I started asking them, What happens when you go to church? And what happens when you pray? What happens when you read the Bible? The voices reacted very negatively to anything religious. So what happened was, if the voices were weak and the patient went to church, the voices would shut up. The voices were moderate strength and they went to church, they would start mocking the preacher, start getting louder and blocking out the patient from hearing what the preacher had to say. So they were interfering with whatever he was saying, making fun of him and whatever. Now, if they were very strong, they would make it so painful that the patient had to jump up and run, actually run out of the church. They were driven out of the church. Okay. So I started handing out the 23rd Psalm and started asking these guys, how'd your voices react to them? They consistently reacted negatively to the 23rd Psalm, to the 91st Psalm. They react negatively to the Bible, to the person praying, to them wanting to read the Bible. It was like they were anti-religious. They wanted nothing to do with religion or spirituality or any kind of positive spiritual practice. So then I was like, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? It just didn't make any sense. And this was consistent among them all. Now, those of you listening to me, on my website at jerrymerzinsky.com, there's a list of 23 of these patterns. You can see them for yourself. I'm only telling you the first few. Mm-hmm. It's not like they buried them in some biological chemical imbalance or genetics or any other kind of crap. They're right there for you to see. They're right there. All you have to do is look at them. And you can, if you're working with schizophrenics or you have schizophrenics, you'll see that you ask them about these things, they'll tell you. It's right there. It's in the open. These voices are running patterns. If they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. I'm only going through the first four. There's a lot more. The next one I noticed is they foster and create negative emotion. All right. Once they get the person negative and fearful and anxious and guilty and paranoid, then their energetic level drops. And that happened time after time after time. There was like a one-to-one correlation between the voices attacking these people and their energetic level dropping down to nothing, where they couldn't function. They couldn't even get out of bed. And it was like time after time after time. So it looked like these things were feeding off of these people, because when the voices attacked after they were done, these people didn't have any energy left. It was gone. One guy told me he felt like he was working out in the hot sun all day with a pickaxe when all he was doing was tossing and turning all night in his bed. Right? This was consistent among hundreds of schizophrenics I talked to. After the voices attack, their energy level drops to nothing. They don't even realize it. They just feel bad. And the voices block them from understanding this also. So it's like you ask them, after the voices attack you, what's your energy doing? They say, well, I don't have any energy. And I go, well, where do you think your energy went? They go, well, I don't know. I said, well, over the years you've had schizophrenia, you've been attacked thousands of times. And every time your energy level dropped. Where do you think it goes? Well, I don't know. And I'd say, well, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times and each time you were burned, what's burning you? They didn't have any trouble. Oh, it's a fire. But then you say, okay, if you are attacked by the voices thousands of times and each time your energy disappears, where do you think it goes? Some of them would go, the voices take it? But the rest, they couldn't get it. They were being blocked from that knowledge. And indeed, the voices,
the connection. Yeah,
they were not allowed to see the connection. Not that connection. They could see other connections. They couldn't see that one. And when I was working in the ER, and like, what can I tell these people that would help them the most? If they did, I had to judge whether they would go tell somebody or something, because psychiatry didn't want anything to do with spirituality or the voices being spirits, or they would gut you. If they found out what I was doing, they would gut me. I learned that the hard way.
I wondered about that, Jerry, because psychiatrists, some of them are also religious, but they don't see the correlation.
I've never seen a spiritual psychiatrist. They don't want to even look at any kind of spiritual anything.
Yeah, but you and Anon, our guest here, you have a special connection. I want to invite you to share that.
Well, Anon contacted me saying that he had heard voices in the past, okay, and that he was willing to tell his story. Okay? So he'd been through, he was locked on a psych ward for about a month.
Yeah, every time Jerry goes into his experiences, like my memory is just saying, "Yep, remember that," like talking about the patterns, how these entities, they want you to isolate, they tend to attack between like midnight and 3 or 4 a.m. They don't want you to get sleep, and Jerry and I connected with Jerry probably about a little over 2 years ago. Just I saw the great work that he was doing out there, getting the message out that these are legitimate patterns, that there's something more to this than just what the mental illness community the mainstream mental illness community is presenting. So I kind of talked to Jerry. I showed him some receipts I had, and like Jerry was screening me to make sure that I was legitimate, and kind of questioned me a little bit too. And we felt like we were both seeing things the same way. So we've kind of started doing some of these podcasts to get the message out there that, hey, schizophrenia does not have to be a life sentence. There are alternate methods to curing the patient, essentially, without having to resort to long-term use of damaging drugs that totally destroy the brain in the long term.
And those drugs do destroy the brain. Psychiatry has pronounced, again, without any evidence, that schizophrenia is due to a biochemical imbalance of the brain. I want to just kind of give people just an inkling of how deceptive psychiatry has been, and they've lied to the population for decades. Okay, so this biochemical imbalance came about. It was not until the late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of a chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric mainstream. As psychiatrist Peter Brigham points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their drug Prozac. There was, of course, no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any imbalance, but Lilly ran with it, long before psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance. And they've shown that there is no difference in serotonin levels in depressed patients either. So the drug companies are saying, oh yeah, their serotonin levels are down, so we're giving them a serotonin blocker, so the serotonin builds up in their nerves, and there's plenty of serotonin. It's a lie. It's a total lie. The pharmaceutical companies are doing it for profits. They're in on almost every aspect of medicine, and now it's so blatant you'd have to be deaf, blind, and dumb not to see it.
I heard the same thing back in 1990 when I was in the psychiatric hospital, that, oh, your brain chemistry is off. You have to get it. We have to return the balance of all the chemicals and everything. And having a scientific, rational mindset, I asked them, well, what's the baseline supposed to be? There should be some sort of range of where it should be. I got blank stares. Nobody could answer that question. It's just, they kind of just skipped right over it when I asked, well, what is the baseline? What's the charts? Where's the data that shows what the baseline is? They couldn't respond to that question, because they've been taught that the pharmaceutical industry is basically resetting the brain chemistry. But what is the brain chemistry supposed to be that they're resetting it to? Nobody has answers to that.
No, they didn't know. They don't know what the brain.
And what had they tested to come up with this conclusion about the brain chemistry? What testing had they done to come up with this?
Zero.
Absolutely none. Zero.
Oh wow!
It's total marketing. Total marketing BS, I should say.
It was a complete lie made up by Eli Lilly. And now they're teaching it in the universities. They're teaching it in colleges. They're teaching it in medical schools. And it's a complete lie. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. Zero. And the reason is money. The antidepressant market in the U.S. is expected to hit $15.98 billion by 2023. the global antipsychotic sales hit $14.54 billion. I'm talking $1 billion in 2021, and is expected to reach $15.5 billion by 2022. These people care nothing except for the money. Okay. Now, one of the Ronald Pies, professor of psychiatry, he says, "I don't believe I've ever heard a knowledgeable, well-trained psychiatrist make such a preposterous claim that patients have a chemical imbalance in their brain, except to perhaps mock it. In truth, chemical imbalance notion was always a kind of urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists. But they're teaching it in the universities. They're teaching it in the medical schools. Drug companies are still putting it out in their advertisements. Like, they changed it a little bit. They go, it is believed that it's a biochemical imbalance. Before that, they were using genes, genetics. So what they want to do is push it out of the purview of the population, so the population cannot see for themselves what's going on. So they did that with genetics, saying, oh, it's a genetic imbalance. The geneticists finally proved there is no genetic marker for mental illness. So then they had to have some other explanation to make them look like they knew what they were doing. They came up with this chemical imbalance lie.
Keep in mind, there's no money in the cure. The money's in treating the symptoms.
That's exactly right.
The pharmaceutical industry is promoting these drugs for long-term use. That's their objective. Now, granted, some of these drugs are good for short-term use, because I think Jerry mentioned there's some patients who have not been able to even reach if they were on some sort of medications for it. So for the short term, yes. And short term, I would say maybe 2 years or less. It's the long-term aspects that there are other ways to cure the patient without having to resort to a lifelong drug-induced state of being on these tranquilizers, these psychotropic medicines.
Right. Back when I was working in the 70s.
But you used a very interesting word, Anon. You called them tranquilizers.
Yeah, they're basic.
A tranquilizer.
That's basically what, in my opinion, that's basically what they are. Because I remember being in the psychiatric ward, and you're a guinea pig. They don't know what drugs to give you to cure your situation, so they just give you a whole bunch of different combination mixes, and whichever one seems to work, that's the one they go with. The problem is, you may appear fine on the outside because you're tranquilized, but your mind is still dealing with these voices and the entities on the inside. It's almost like you're kind of still trapped on the inside dealing with the issues, but they've just drugged you out with a tranquilizer, so you look calm on the outside. That's really, in my opinion, all that these drugs are doing.
Yeah, and I pretty much agree with that. They were major tranquilizers. And what they do is they just calm the patient down, so they make them easier to handle. They're not as violent. There's not as many fights. And it's like when psychiatry saw that phenothiazines were available, that was like they just latched onto it. It's like, this is our purview. This is our little area. They don't even like general practitioners prescribing psychiatric drugs. Because they said, well, we're the experts at it. And like Anon says, it's like a dartboard. It's subjective. They go, well, I think we'll start with this drug and that drug and this drug. And what I noticed when I was at the state hospital, like Anon said, is they never gave any test ahead of time to find out what was out of balance or by how much. And I asked them about it, and the psychiatrist says, well, we just trust the pharmaceutical companies to tell us what drugs to use. And I'm like, what? It's like, what? It's like letting the fox in the hen house. So there is no test for a biological imbalance. They don't even know what the balance of the brain should be, the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone what's out of balance. They have no idea. It's a complete lie. It's a fabrication. So what I'm trying to get at is how slimy psychiatry is. I mean, they've brainwashed the entire planet, and they're drugging everybody they possibly can. You go into a psychiatrist's office, you're not going to come out of there without some kind of prescription for some drug. I mean, it's drug. Psychology is also involved with this, with their DSM. So they both use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Okay, this is listing and it looks like a real scientific work. There's pattern, there's categories, there's numbers, there's sub numbers. I mean, you open it up and it looks like a real work of science, but it's all made up. It's all fabricated. There's not a single test, a single objective test for even one of those mental disorders in the DSM. Not even one, you know. So they tried to turn these into what are they called?
Well, they're used for insurance code purposes only, it seems to be.
Well, they use it for that. They tried to turn them into diseases, you know, and the medical establishment said, no, they're not. They don't even come near the description of diseases as we know them. So they were trying to make them diseases, and the rest of the medical establishment said, no, we don't want any part of that. So,
what was the benefit in defining them or putting them in a category of a disease?
Well, then they would have the backing of the medical establishment. You know, it wouldn't just be psychiatry. So, because right now they're disorders or mental disorders or mental illnesses. They don't have the same status as a physical illness, like an infection, where you can give the person a antibiotic and the infection disappears. Doesn't work that way with psychiatry. You know, you give people antipsychotic drugs, it calms them down, but as soon as they go off of those drugs, the schizophrenia is right back in your face again. It doesn't cure anything. None of those psychiatric drugs cure anything. All they do is treat symptoms. You know, but people are so freaked out by these mental illnesses that they don't understand that the first thing they do is run to a psychiatrist. You know, oh, they know what's going on. No, they don't know what's going on. They know how to treat the symptoms. That's it. They don't know how to treat the causes at all.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, because we see a lot of stigma, you know, when it comes to mental health, especially, you know, to the level of schizophrenia and, you know, the degrees in which you work with. And I think this is what makes people, you know, when you have already stigmatized something, it's already put a kind of like an undertone, a little buffer in asking questions and digging deep, because you're already not comfortable talking about it. So how can you ask all the questions? You're just ready to accept anything, like just fix it already. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know, the society is programmed to go, well, we want an instant cure. You know, we want to take a pill and fix this. Psychiatry has plenty of pills, but they're not fixing anything. You know? And like Anon said, it's like a guessing game what to start with, and they'll increase the dosage and decrease the dosage, and then add different pills, and then add more pills, and then take pills away. And I've seen some patients with, you know, they have a cup full of pills. I mean, they're taking like dozens of pills, you know, and they're walking around like zombies, you know. So this is just part of the deception of psychiatry, and it goes on with their diagnostic and statistical manual, which looks like a work of science, but every single one of those disorders have been completely made up. They don't exist like an infection. You can see an infection. These are all made up. They give them numbers. They give them descriptions. So when they're like a normal span of behavior, and cut up into sections, and sections are pathologized. Okay, so everybody has some of these symptoms. It's the extent to which they have them that makes them dysfunctional.
Yeah, I think the problem with the DSM is it tries to slice it into individual categories. And I found my experience with mental illness is that's not how it works. You can have a little bit of bipolar going, you can have a little bit of manic depressive going, you can have a little bit of schizophrenia going on. And we all as individuals have these minor symptoms, but they're below a certain threshold where we can function just fine in our lives. It's when these symptoms or the pathology of it starts to go above a certain threshold where we can't function properly in life, that's where it becomes problematic.
See, and I ran into that studying abnormal psychology. It's like, well, I got that, and I got that. I got symptoms of that, and I got symptoms of that.
Every abnormal psychology student starts thinking, "Oh my gosh, I think I am this."
I did. I mean, because I saw those. You know, it wasn't major, but they was there. It was noticeable. You know, so what they did, they fabricated this. They use it, like Anon said, for insurance purposes, because they have to have some kind of diagnosis. And
yeah, that's what I always wondered about, because these names are invented. And I know that they don't, okay, please, people, take this with a lot of discernment, what I'm about to say, but they don't mean a lot. They don't mean anything, because when you go to alternative naturopaths, alternative methods of treatment, or homeopathic treatments, they don't use any of these diagnoses. They just want to understand the body. So you can go with all kinds of symptoms, but they just want to know, how did you get there? And that's what I find so interesting. No matter whether you have, a tumor or whatever, they just want to know, how did this form? And they're not looking at where the tumor is. Sometimes they're looking somewhere else, at the blood, at your environmental factors, even mold in the house. It could be anything. They want to understand your whole environment holistically, And so, over time, I got to realize that, what do these names mean? What is cancer? What is bipolar? What is this? Because it's foreign to alternative. They don't use these words. I just learned that, over time. But you can talk about this because, it's your profession. Maybe you can help us understand how these definitions are formed.
Like Anon says, these are just labels, and they're fairly destructive labels too. You get labeled schizophrenic. That's a major diagnosis.
Oh yeah, I felt like I had to hide. I never revealed that I had schizophrenia, and nobody ever told me that it would be a life sentence for me, that I couldn't be cured from it. Maybe that's why I was able to surpass it, because I was never told that you'll never recover from this.
Yeah, and see, that's the other diabolical thing with it. It's like you go in there, and a lot of psychiatrists will say, "Well, there's no cure for it."
Oh, somebody actually
this is a life sentence. Oh yeah. Yeah, okay. I've seen them several times. They go, "This is a life sentence. The only thing you can do is take these drugs for the rest of your life, and keep paying us." And those drugs are extremely expensive. They're close to $1,000 a month. The people who are suffering from this, they can't afford that stuff. And you go across the border to Mexico, you get those same drugs for $75 for the same amount, made by the same companies. So the pharmaceutical industry is ripping off, Western countries because they can afford to pay for these. If they weren't making a profit at $75 selling them in Mexico, they wouldn't be selling them there. So what they have is a list of almost 300 of these mental illnesses right now, 296, I believe, all of them fabricated. In 1952, there were only 106. In 1980, there were 256. Now there's 297. Right? And 2/3 of the psychiatrists on the board responsible for making up these psychiatric disorders are in league with psychiatry, with the pharmaceutical industry. 2/3. So here's a statement by a psychiatrist. He says, every mental disorder in the DSM is defined by a list of behavioral symptoms that committees of psychiatrists have debated and decided which clusters of symptoms add up to which labels and mental disorders.
Okay.
Not one of the 297 mental disorders has a defining diagnostic lab test. Not one. There's no blood test. There's no lab test. There's no x-rays. These are just classes of behaviors voted in and voted out. They vote them in. I got a new mental disorder. So they make them up every 3 years. There's new mental disorders coming in. And they're ridiculous. I mean, here's some of the ones they have in the DSM. Mathematics disorder. If you don't like math, you got a mathematics disorder. That's me. Caffeine intoxication disorder. You drink too much coffee. You're disordered. You're psychiatrically disordered.
That's probably the whole of Denmark.
Sibling relational disorder.
I just drink it like it's water.
So they got a disorder according to psychiatry. Sibling relational disorder. Kids fighting. They're disordered. Florence syndrome. Being overwhelmed by beauty, such as in Florence, Italy. Feigning, it's marked by symptoms of feigning, dizziness, and disorientation. Their recommended treatment is antidepressants.
Drugs again.
Paris syndrome. Mostly Japanese patients visiting France. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecution. Earlier, we would have called that cultural shock.
There's Jerusalem syndrome too. I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah. There was a Jerusalem
The French should
syndrome.
really look at their hospitality. They're causing people to get shocked.
They don't care. They want to give these drugs to whoever will take them. Right now, there's more than, and this is like 10 years old. This information, more than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs.
How many?
7.2 million kids, and that's just in the U.S. Right?
Wow.
That's just in the U.S. So over 622,000 children under the age of 5 are on ADHD drugs. All right.
Wow.
80 over 80,000. This is amphetamine they're feeding these kids. It causes long term, it causes memory problems. Over 38,000 kids are on antidepressants. Over 85,000. Now these 85,000 on antipsychotic drugs. These are the same drugs that Anon took. They're major tranquilizers. They do brain damage. They physiologically damage the neurological system. Over 389,000 are on anti-anxiety drugs. They're just drugging these kids. This is not a good thing.
That is a lot. Those are some really serious numbers. I don't know if it's the same in Europe over here, because I just started hearing the ADHD thing maybe 5-6 years ago. That's when I started to see it, the increase in that. But before that, you hardly found or heard of anybody talking about ADHD over here. Now, I might be very wrong, because this is based on my observation, so I think I'm very shocked by those numbers.
We look at the results right now. This is for the U.S.
Yeah, the U.S.
Every year, 50,000 people in the U.S. kill themselves. 50,000. That's 50,000. That's as many that died in 10 years of Vietnam War. And this is year after year after year, and it's increasing. And this is
from mental health, psychosis?
No, it's from whatever. They kill themselves. But there's got to be something in their head telling them to do that. Okay? It's not. It's not their thought, because you don't see it in the animal kingdom. Do you ever see 50,000 lemons kill themselves, or 50,000 cows all of a sudden decide to kill themselves? Animals don't kill themselves. We're the only race that kills ourselves. Why is that? Because we're hearing voices in our head that tell us to do that. There's a thought before the action is taken. And those thoughts come from what Anon is going to be talking about. Now, we got more psychiatrists, we got more psychologists, we got more psychiatric drugs on the planet now than we've ever had in the history of mankind, and we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. The psychiatric hospitals are full to overflowing, the prisons are full to overflowing. I give the psychiatry an F for what they're doing. Now, their meds are necessary in a lot of cases.
They have their place, but their place is not everywhere.
It's not everywhere, and it's not all the time forever. There are new therapeutic systems out there, the MACE energy method, that actually gets to the cure of a lot of mental disorders. Okay, before you go to a psychiatrist, please visit www.causism.institute.com. You can find a MACE therapist there who will help you out and will likely get rid of most of the problems you have without you taking drugs, and it's a permanent cure. You don't have to take any drugs, and it's a lot cheaper than going to psychiatry. So these voices that schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations. They're not due to a chemical imbalance. They're not due to genetics. These are entities. These are spiritual entities. I've spoken to them. They've threatened me. I can feel them. I've spoken to hundreds of inmates who had them. These things are not hallucinations. They're entities. So I'm going to let Anon talk, and he will tell you his story. That instead of just taking it from me, Anon went through this and came out the other end sane. because
I was one of the lucky
aware.
ones.
Yeah, he was aware of what these things were. He figured it out.
Yeah. Good job, Anon.
Oh, well, thank you. So hopefully I can share my story to help others who are dealing with schizophrenia or have relatives or friends that are dealing with schizophrenia, or even anybody who's starting to hear some negative voices or negative thoughts, and other forms of mental illness may be related to these entities. So I had gone to college to get a degree in mechanical engineering, and upon graduation, I had a little bit of time. I think I wanted to kind of determine what person I was going to become, what direction to head in life, trying to determine where I was going to go in the future. So I started to read the Bible a little bit, to just on my own. Like, I wanted to remove the middleman. I was baptized Greek Orthodox, so I had exposure to some of the Greek Orthodox Church's teachings. I attended a Methodist Sunday school throughout my elementary school years. And in high school, I was participating in a Roman Catholic youth group, even though I wasn't actually Roman Catholic. So I had exposure to some of the Christian ideas, and I wasn't by any means a Bible thumper, as they say. I was more like I interpreted the scriptures as just learning to become a decent human being, developing your consciousness and a sense of ethics and morality. And I never, I wasn't into the occult or anything like that. I've heard of demons in the Bible and in horror movies, but I never really took them that serious or anything like that. So I started to read the Bible, and strange things started happening then. It was, at times I started to feel very euphoric, almost Christ-like, and I didn't quite understand what to do with these sensations and feelings. How to apply this. And other times later on in the ordeal, I started to feel like my self-worth was going to zero. It's like voices or very strong thoughts were kind of telling me that I was worthless, give it up, you're a failure in life, you don't deserve friends. And I wasn't a loner by any means in high school. I mean, I had friends and people I associated with and everything else. But it was like a whole bunch of different things started going on. This is probably my mid-20s. And it was weird because I had taken psychology courses in college. I took abnormal psychology actually as an elective, so I was very aware of the various diagnoses, the DSM, bipolar, manic depressive, schizophrenia. And then I started encountering some of this stuff, and I said, wow, I know my college textbook said one thing from the scientific approach, but this definitely feels like something's trying to take over my personality or my body at times. And what happened is I was becoming very, very depressed. I was isolating myself, wasn't sleeping at night, and I was crashing, basically. So I was being put on a low dose of lithium at first through a social program. My world was basically kind of falling apart. I was unemployed, and there was kind of a lot of repressed childhood trauma that was frothing to the surface, trauma that I had never really dealt with. And I think that was coming up as well. So many things were going on simultaneously here. And I ended up on the lithium. There was a point in time where my whole body started kind of thrashing all over the place. And my arms and legs were moving. And I almost felt like something else was moving it, like it wasn't myself that was moving it. Mm-hmm. And I was sent to the ER room, the emergency room of a hospital, to see if this was something, if I had taken overdose of lithium, if it was a tumor or something like that. So they did a bunch of tests, to the MRIs and everything, and concluded it was psychological, not neurological or physical. And I have to admit, prior to that point, I was so depressed I couldn't even think anymore. Like, something was just dominating my thoughts. I graduated with an engineering degree. I couldn't even add numbers at some points in time. My mind just was not functioning. Like, something was taking it over. I remember sometimes I would try and speak. I couldn't get my words out. Like, I couldn't find the train of thought to even speak. So my words would kind of come out as, and like something was fighting in my head back and forth. Like it definitely felt like an attempted possession at times. So after the ER visit, I was voluntarily submitted into a psychiatric hospital. I was there for about 4 weeks, and as Jerry said, they don't know what type of drugs to give you, to prescribe you, to snap you out of it. You're like a guinea pig. They're just throwing darts. I remember they gave me all different types of pills on different days. Some were oval shaped, some were pink, some were blue, some were octagon. Sometimes they give you a combination of pills. They'd switch it around based on what was occurring. And they kept asking me, "Are you hearing voices? Are you hearing voices?" And I was always say yes, but with the caveat that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. I haven't been sleeping well, and I'm not getting the right REM sleep or anything like that. And I remember they kept asking what my name was throughout the entire ordeal, and I was getting a little angry with this, just because they have my file and charts there. Can't these doctors and staff remember what my name was? And I realized they weren't asking my name because they forgot. They were asking my name all the time to make sure that I knew who I was. And I never just associated with who I was as far as the name of my birth certificate or anything like that. And these pills that they give you, I mean, they're not fun. They have some very nasty side effects. They're not the type of drugs you want to take it for recreational purposes by any means. I remember sometimes my mouth was so dry, I just cotton mouth for like 3 or 4 days. Sometimes you feel like you have like 80-pound weights on your feet. You could barely walk, like you're in a zombie state. I remember sometimes I would change the direction of my view, and the scenes would shift to catch up to where I was looking. I would look back, and the scenes would shift to catch up. There's a few days in the psychiatric hospital I don't even remember, and I assume that was from the drugs, just totally tranquilizing me, where I had no idea what was going on. So I was going back and forth and dealing with these voices and very strong negative thoughts. Like I was on the fence. It's like, are these my own thoughts, or are these something external actually coming in and attacking me? Coming from a rational, logical, scientific upbringing, I was on the fence. I didn't really know. I was in a state of cognitive dissonance because I couldn't quite tell. Sometimes I felt like, wow, this is a real spiritual, profound shamanic experience that I'm going through. And other times I was, no, this is nonsense. It's just my mind playing tricks on me.
This is something that has to be done by schizophrenics. They have to understand that those voices are not who they are. And Anon approached it very rationally and kind of got through it that way. But a lot of them think, well, that's me. That's who I am. And I've had prisoners who ask them, who are you? What are you? And the voices would say, we are you. They want the patient to believe that the thoughts that they're putting in their mind belong to them, and that's who they are. And psychiatry goes right along with that. Yeah, you're crazy. Your brain is broken. Those voices are you. We have to give you these drugs to do something with you. I mean, so they're doing a disservice to these people. Any schizophrenic who's going to recover and is hearing voices has to understand that those voices they hear do not belong to them. If they don't understand that, they're never going to ever recover.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is so important, Jerry, and also Anon. You would not feed yourself. You'd not beat yourself over the head with negative words.
Yes.
That's so important what you keep saying. You would never do that. So this is because I know the people were probably saying, how do you know the difference? You wouldn't want to speak that negative talk. You wouldn't want to do that to yourself. Right. People I think most human beings are built to feel good, and you wouldn't be doing that constantly. That's just how I see it. But Anon, you wanted to say something.
No, that's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah, and the intent of the voices. You look at their intent. Their intent is malicious to make you feel bad.
Do that to yourself.
No, you wouldn't do that to yourself normally. That's not you doing that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was undergoing this condition, it was like, I didn't know what my mind was doing. That's just what it comes down to. And these voices are very strong negative thoughts. I mean, they're bullies. They gaslight you. They're saying everything they can possibly to make you generate negative emotions. They want to keep you in a state of anxiousness, paranoia. They will distort your reality. They will actually use your memories against you. And sometimes they will make up memories and put it in your head to generate some sort of negative emotions or negative energies. And I think I think they're trying to amplify them. So if you have a little bit of negative thoughts, if they see a moment of opportunity, they'll go in there and try to amplify those negative thoughts, generate more and more of them.
Yeah.
And the model that I've approached is a lot of times people who end up with the diagnosis of schizophrenia have endured trauma in their life. It could be physical, sexual, psychological trauma. And so they may have what I call fissures or fractures in the psyche. And these fissures or fractures, this is how these entities try to get in. They're entry points. And alcohol and some of the harder drugs out there, like methamphetamines, if I said that correctly, meth.
Yeah, methamphetamines is the worst. It's like it just opens you up and says, come and get me. I mean, I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on methamphetamine than any other drug. I mean, it just opens you up. I mean, the prisoners called it the devil's drug. Okay. And for that reason, and these voices they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. All they want to do is get the person upset, so they can generate that negative emotional energy, that loosh that they then feed on. So they're actually feeding on these people. They feed on all of us. I mean, they hit us all. I mean, you can be walking along the sidewalk.
They test everybody.
Yep. They put a horrible negative thought in your head to see if you'll bite on it. Will you, remunerate on it? Just go over and over and over and over again. They have access to your memory. They can bring up every rotten thing you've ever done and say, look at what you did. You did this thing. You killed this bird. You did, just throw it in your face until they can generate that negative emotional energy. So
Guilt's one of the things they feed off of too.
What you're saying is so important, Jerry. You guys are saying it's very important, because Anon, you said they test everybody. This is so important. And I think I'm seeing this as you're dropping remedies or ways for people to deal with, to have early intervention per se, to nip it, once you identify it, you can just, I don't know whether you know what I'm saying, because as you're describing that they test everybody, and they will try and pull up this and pull this up. I see it also happening as a two-way street, meaning like other people would also get the negative thoughts to harm others. And then these people will then get to experience some kind of trauma. You see, so it's kind of like what we're watching happen in the world is people are harming each other, creating trauma points. And then you called it fractures, right? So, so it's happening all around us. So somebody is creating fractures in somebody, and then now there's an opportunity there to now make this traumatized person, to hijack this traumatized person's mind and then just run with it. Am I on the right track, or am I going?
No, you're on the right track.
I think you are.
Yeah, you go back to the 50,000 people in the U.S. who killed themselves, and you go, well, what would these entities feed on once the person kills themselves? But then you look at the result of that. What happens to the family of somebody who commits suicide?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like throwing a rock in the water and watching the ripples just go out. So that death causes untold agony and guilt and shame. And if I would have done this, he wouldn't have done that, or I was a bad parent, or they win either way.
These entities, they do not like humanity. I mean, they feed off of trauma. I mean, the wars and stuff going on in the Middle East and the Ukraine, they're feeding off that stuff.
Oh yeah, that's a hog's trough for them. All the suffering and wounded soldiers and the trauma created out there, it's a hog's trough. They're just. I think I read over the last 2,000 years, there's only been 271 years of peace on this planet.
So going back to, I was in the psychiatric hospital, and I remember they give you all sorts of pills and drugs, and nothing was snapping me out of it. As I said, and I mentioned how they said, "Oh, it's brain chemistry." I've heard them. They said it was genetics. Oh, it's due to the mother. I mean, I've heard all those things.
Oh, wow.
And no, there's something else going on here. So none of the pills were working. My health coverage was about to run out. I was in the final week there. they decided to resort to ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. That's where they actually will shock the brain. Now, this was done to me in 1990, so it wasn't as horrid to what Jerry probably witnessed in the 80s and in the 70s.
I almost fainted when I watched one at the state hospital. That's how horrible it was. And I got a pretty strong stomach.
In my case, what they actually do is it's almost like being prepped for surgery. They have to give you a muscle relaxant because you can go into seizures, you can break ligaments and bones when they jolt the brain with the electricity. And they actually put you under anesthesia at the same time. So you're kind of knocked out for it. The whole current might run what was it, Jerry? It's about 30 seconds to a minute where they actually run the current.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's a minute. It seemed like it was about maybe 30 seconds. It seemed like forever to me.
And most of it's prep time with it. But anyhow, I have to admit it helped me because after my very first treatment, I felt like myself again. I didn't have all these negative thoughts and negative voices in my head anymore. It's almost like prior to having the ECT, like the old vinyl records, like the needle was stuck in a groove. I couldn't get out of it. It was like this circle of negativity in my head. And what that ECT did, it seemed to reset myself a little bit. And prior to doing the ECT, I remember one of the nights in the hospital where those voices got so strong and so intense. I mean, I didn't sleep at all some nights. It was like a cacophony. Sounded like being in a movie theater or at a show or a play before it starts, and everybody in the audience is talking back and forth to each other on their cell phones or their neighbors. It was all these voices, men, women, and children, and I felt like they were after me, and I just tried to ignore them. And these attacks continued. The negativity, what these voices were saying to me and everything. You're worthless. Give it up. You're evil. You're the devil. You're no good. You're a joke. You're a mockery to the world. And eventually it came down to like a council of maybe, it felt like there was only 12 voices, then eventually faded to 7 voices. This all happened within about a 24-hour period. But I remember one of the final voices, when it was down to like a council of about 7 or 5, said very distinctively, "What are we going to do about him?" In my head. And so I knew that they were talking about me. And things I wasn't letting him get to me. I was trying to like just block him off. And it was very, very difficult to do that.
That reminds me of a patient where they were talking behind his back, saying, "How should we kill him? You know, what should we do it this way or should we do it that way?" Or, you know, so they were telling the patient was hearing this.
And again, I'm lying here in a state of cognitive dissonance. It's like, what is going on here? Is this my mind just playing tricks on me? I mean, I knew I was not in the right state of mind. I said, or is there something more profound going on? And I think part of my survival of getting through this was I almost had to go in a state of a split mind. One aspect of my mind was the victim or the target dealing with all this, the patient. The other half, kind of the scientific method, was the observer. I said, okay, you know, I'm kind of a scientist at heart. Let me observe what's going on here. Let me observe what I'm experiencing and encountering here, so that I can try and handle it. So they did the first ECT session, and in my case, it helped me. I mean, I felt whole again. I felt like I could start rebuilding myself as a human being. And keep in mind, the ECT, it's electrical energy. It's not a pill. It's not a chemistry. It's like an electrical shock to the brain. And they insisted that I had to have at least a total of 6 ECT treatments. But I got to tell you, at the very first one, I felt like better, like I started rebuilding myself. I didn't feel any different after going through 5 more ECT treatments than I did after the first one. But they insisted, no, you have to do a total of 6 ECT treatments.
So it's interesting that, and I've watched that at the state hospital too, the voices would disappear for days or weeks after shock treatment. They did not like that shock treatment, but they eventually came back. You know, so it's interesting that the voices are energy. I mean, electricity is energy. So here's energy affecting energy. I mean, now,
and we also are electrical beings. We're
electrical beings. We're you know, we're energetic beings.
Yeah.
Here's what psychiatry is doing is like, you know, you get a magnetic field, you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it. It's kind of like normal people can't hear and see the voices, and dumping antipsychotic drugs into a magnetic field and expecting that magnetic field to disappear. No, this is physical stuff. It doesn't get rid of negative energetic beings, which is what these things are. They're energetic parasites. It affects the brain. It calms down the brain, which is like a radio receiver. So it's picking up a certain frequency. You dump those drugs on there, it gums up the receiver and slows it down, but it doesn't cure anything because the cause is energetic.
So I was essentially drawing upon my religious upbringing from a Judaic Christian perspective, the better aspects of those, to kind of deal with this situation. And again, I'm going back and forth. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. So I was released from the hospital probably early fall of 1990, and the voices did come back probably about 3 months later. As Jerry said, the ECT treatment is temporary. It may scald these entities for the short term, but they tend to regroup and come back. But this time, the attacks kind of changed. Now I felt like I was going through some sort of hierarchy. And the initial things these voices started saying, this is probably about December of 1990, January 1991, they were kind of making me an offer. It's like they were going to give me a path to instantaneous wealth, fame, and power. But I had to kind of sell my soul to them. And I just didn't think it was coming from something that was beneficial or good. And they actually showed me how to get there. Now, I'd probably have to give up some of my morality and my ethics to do so, but they showed me a path to pretty quickly achieving great wealth and fame and power. And I said no to it. And it was tough because I was unemployed at the time. My income that year was below poverty level. Fortunately, I had one credit card, and I was able to pay for my health insurance bills and my food and whatever rent I needed to by just using that one credit card. So I was going into farther debt on this one credit card, but that's the only way I could survive because there was no other income coming in. And so these entity or whatever it was made me this offer, and I said no, I don't want it. It was very tempting. And I don't think it was too happy that I turned down the offer, but it's almost like a Faustian bargain it was offering me.
Yeah, a similar thing happened to me when the voices in one client offered me a lottery number. And I turned it down like Anon did. I didn't want any part of whatever they had to give me.
It just didn't seem like it was coming from a good means. That there's something nefarious behind it.
Yeah, it just didn't feel good.
And later on, I remember I was offered the secrets of the universe. It was going to show me the codes of how the universe works and that sort of thing. And I kind of said no to that as well. I think I was more scared that I knew I was a human being, that I had my vulnerabilities and susceptibilities, and I didn't want that type of power or knowledge. I didn't think personally I would be able to handle it properly. I was still in my mid-20s. The ego was still very strong then. I was still into, I wouldn't say materialism, but I knew I hadn't developed maturely enough or had enough wisdom to be able to handle such powers and understanding. And I said no to it. I said, hey, in a few...
they had some very high level knowledge, which means, you know what I mean? They have the keys, the universe, they know all this stuff. So that's quite telling, about what, the level of, of deception, the layers of deception.
I've seen them know stuff that they shouldn't have known because, especially with meth addicts, they would tell these prisoners where to be and when to be there when they ran out of meth. They would tell them which houses to rob, generally where the loot was, if the people got up in the house, when to run, where to go to hide. I mean, it was the person himself didn't have that knowledge. And there was one where they told him to break into a house. He broke into the house. They told him generally where the loot was. The people got up. They told him that the people are up. You better get out of the house. So he got out of the house and he was going to run down this one alley. And they told him, no, don't run down that. The cops are coming down that alley. Go down this way. There's a dumpster there. Go hide in the dumpster. So he went and he hid in the dumpster with what he'd stolen from the house. The cops went right by there, and they telling him, okay, now get out and run. And he said, well, the cop's right there. They said, no, it doesn't matter. Get out and run. So he did. He came back to his apartment, and the voices were telling him, good job, good job. He said, no, not so good job. I left all the loot back in the dumpster. They said, no big deal. Just go get it in the morning. So
it seems like this is a big operation. They're responsible for the crime sector, the scientific sector, the codes to the universe. I know I'm just trying to understand who these entities are, because
they're what they normally call the Archons.
But they're ancient. How do they have the keys to the universe? The stuff Anon was talking about. This is.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Not basic. It's not high school or, the keys to the universe, the codes, and this is stuff that is not even taught in our schools.
The other thing, you can't trust anything they say.
Yeah.
There was one patient where they told him, if you gouge out your eye, we'll go away. We won't ever come back. So he went and did that. He actually gouged out his eye. They showed up and they started laughing and mocking him, saying, look, you're a fool. You listen to us. Look how stupid you are. Now you're a freak. People are going to see you as a freak for the rest of your life. And it started mocking him. So that's what these things are like. You can't trust anything
Super
they
bullies.
say. And liars, consummate liars. They lie about everything. All they want to do is upset you. Now, so they upset that guy for the rest of his life now.
But it was interesting, Anon, they were willing to trade your soul for whatever, anything, keys and whatever. But again, they're liars and tricksters. But go ahead. So
there's a number.
I just kept thinking, who are they with this knowledge, and why do they have it? Because
there's a number of movie stars and musicians who have made that trade, and they did become famous, and they admitted that, I gave my soul to the devil, and I got all this fame and money.
Yeah, but I've always wondered, how do you give a soul? You can't touch it, you can't see it. You know what I mean? I know this is
they don't give it, but what they can do is take it over. That's their plan. So what they'll do, they'll push the person's personality out of the way, and they will take over. And when I have a poem written here, I can read at the end from somebody who's in a maximum security block in seclusion right now. He killed 3 people, and he cut his girlfriend up into little pieces, and he wrote a poem about his voices. So I can read that at the end, so you see what happens when they really completely take somebody over.
Yeah, but we see that also in courts, when people, I remember back in the day when we used to see the court cases where people did some heinous crime, they always said, many of them said, I don't know, I don't remember.
Right. And they don't.
I didn't do it. Yeah. And it was so strange. But now in 2024, having this conversation, it makes sense. Back then they just looked like liars or, having mental illness. But now it's beginning to make sense. It wasn't them, but maybe the influence.
Right. So they have to lock them, because since they can't get those entities out of them, they have to lock them and the entities up.
Yeah, they're too far gone. I've heard the term walk-ins too. There's a term that's out there where something can actually walk in and take over your personality, push your personality to the side, or move your soul over, or somehow mesh with you in a certain way.
That's usually an agreed upon thing, from what I understand. It was supposed to have happened to Lincoln in the last days of, he kind of, and it was supposed to, a walk-in was supposed to have taken him over and finished up.
Oh, Abraham Lincoln?
Abraham Lincoln, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, I'm sorry. But
no problem. No, this is all interesting.
You're opening so many boxes, and
it's a lot of rabbit holes.
Okay.
But it's informative too. So, I wasn't sure if I was being tormented, tortured, going through some sort of testing, trials, tribulations, initiations. It was a whole mix of all the stuff going on. And so it became like a series of different adversaries that I seemed to be encountering. And I could tell they felt like they were different in the sense that their vocabulary would change and their intelligence level would change too. As I was going through some sort of, it seemed like a managerial hierarchy.
Yeah, some of them are very sly, and some of them are very stupid. There was one that just went, hey, 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 to the patient. The patient was wondering, does he mean, hey, me, or does he mean, hey, like the grass? Some of them are really stupid. Some of them are very sly. I mean, just very, very sly.
But regardless, if you're hearing any type of voice in your head that you feel is not you, that creates a sense of anxiety and upset, and I guess you're in an elevated state, and it's often negative too.
Yeah, and you don't know what's going on. It's like, and you don't want to tell anybody.
So I went through a series of trials and tribulations, adversaries. This is probably approaching spring of winter, spring of 1991. And I remember one of them started, or a group of them started kind of saying that humanity's a worthless species. They shouldn't be allowed to exist. They'll never learn. And I remember that I would actually see scenes flashing before my eyes, almost like a cinematography effect, like being in a theater with multiple screens, but it was showing me scenes of the wars and battles throughout humanity's history and all the violence and everything. And these voices would say, see, humanity will never learn. They're just violent creatures, that they'll never change, they'll never mature. And I started to argue against these voices or very strong thoughts. If nobody was around, I would actually talk out loud to them. If anybody was around me, I'd just do it internally.
Yeah, I saw that so many times. And after I got out of the state hospital and cell phones came around, and they have these buds in their ears.
You can't tell the difference.
I was freaked out. I still am freaked out. It's like, oh, there's another one. It's like it was like an instinctual thing. It was like, it took me a while to kind of.
Is that person schizophrenic just talking to cell phone?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because it was just like the state hospital, where they're carrying on these conversations with the voices, walking around like, oh yeah. Look exactly the same. It took me years to get over that.
It's not word salad, as Jersey. These are full conversations.
Oh, I know.
With these voices and entities.
Yeah, people need to realize that they're full, coherent conversations. They're not word salad. They're not garbage. They have a method and an intent, and the intent is evil. It's not good intent.
So I started standing up to them. It's like, okay, they're telling me how horrible humanity is and don't deserve to exist. It's like I was being judged and humanity was being judged at the same time. And I almost felt like I was becoming like a defense attorney for humanity, or a champion of sorts. But I started standing up to them, and I would say, yes, some human beings are awful, full of hatred and violence, but others are full of love and compassion. And I said to these entities or voices, I said, you don't condemn an entire species because of the actions of a few. So it's almost like I was facing this tribunal and arguing back and forth with them and trying to defend humanity against all their accusations of what they're saying. And I remember one of the later trials or tribulations, they would say how, you human beings, you're just composed of blood, flesh, and bones. When you die, you get eaten by bacteria and worms. You just rot in the grave. There's nothing to your body or form. It's awful. They were basically mocking the human form. And I started arguing back to them. I said, wait a second. You can't put that on humanity. I said, our shape or form was given to us or granted to us or forced upon us by the divine hand. That's something that God created us this way. I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. And it was interesting because this particular accusation, they backed off right away. This only went on for a couple of weeks, where the other trials or tribulations or accusations or adversarial comments went on for months at a time. And I realized, wow, I can fight against these voices or entities. In other words, my case was so strong, my defense argument was so strong that they backed off right away. Because I realized they didn't have a case. They were kind of going after the human form. And I said, wait a second, that's not humanity's thing. I said, we are who we are because of God. Don't take this out on us.
So this is an important point too. You have to fight back against them. You can't just say, oh, I don't know what they are, or go. You have to fight back. You have to resist them. Otherwise, they'll take.
It will be tough at times. It will be tough because when you start resisting them,
they're going to make it tough on you.
They're going to attack even more because it's like, this target or victim is fighting back. We got to we got to stop this.
Right.
No.
So it'll get worse once you start fighting back, but you have to.
Right. It'll get worse, but in the long run, you will win. So I realized, I have a chance against these things. Now, I'm in a broken state at this point in time because it's like, I'm not, like I said, I'm still not sure what's going on here. I'm suicidal because these thoughts keep at you. Like they wanted me to kill myself constantly throughout this whole ordeal of a couple years or so. And they would actually tell me how to do it. They would say sometimes, climb a high voltage electrical tower and jump into the wires. Very dramatic way to kill oneself. Then they started just saying, just do it with carbon monoxide poisoning. And there were times I was actually getting out the duct tape and the pipes to connect to my car to kill myself in the garage or a car. And I think I had a higher thought that stopped me from doing it. I think I had some younger nieces at the time, and I just realized if their uncle had killed themselves, it would have given them a permission slip for them to do as well. I was more thinking about them than myself there, and I think that's what kind of stopped me. But that's a positive emotion. It's compassion, empathy for somebody else a little bit too. And that's kind
virtually all the schizophrenics I talked to, at some point, the voices would tell them to kill themselves. Just get it over with. Nobody loves you. Nobody likes you. You're worthless. You're causing everybody a lot of problems. Just kill yourself and get it over with.
I heard all those thoughts, all those strong negative voices, all those things said. So it came down to, I was at rock bottom. I was in a total state of despair. I was dealing with having the stigma of being diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I'm wondering, am I ever going to be able to get my life back together? Am I ever going to get these thoughts out of my head? Who's going to hire me? I'm going to be in a state institution for the rest of my life. And the final battle of tribulation that started to occur was something was telling me God doesn't exist. Give it up. Your humanities and your religions are stupid. You're just material atoms. There is nothing more than your body. There is no soul. There is no psyche or spirit. It's all a bunch of bull malarkey. In other words, these very strong thoughts or negative voices or entities were trying to destroy any sense of faith that I had left within me. And it was kind of my faith that was getting me through this stuff. And I admit, they were starting to diminish my faith. I was losing my faith that there was God, however we choose to define him, her, or it. And these voices started going after that. And I was starting to lose the battle. I was ready to give up. I was ready to kill myself and just say, I'm done with this. I can't deal with this anymore. This has been going on for over a year. My mind is mad. I'm a lunatic. And here these voices were trying to tell me that God is dead. God doesn't exist. Give it up. No such thing as a soul.
What kind of hallucination would do that?
So finally, I was at rock bottom, as low as somebody could go, total state of despair. I started praying to God. I said, God, give me a sign. I said, I don't know if you're there or not. I'm dealing with this madness in my head. I don't know if it's something legitimate, more profound, or if it's just my mind playing tricks on me. I need a sign. I need to know that you're there. I need to know that this battle that I'm going through has legitimacy to it. I don't care what the sign was. I never said to God what the sign should be. Mm-hmm. If a Bible had shown up in the mail by mistake in my address, I would have accepted that. That's the sign. If a priest had knocked on my door, I would have accepted that as a sign. If I saw a rabbi walking down the street, that would have been good enough for me. I didn't say what the sign was going to be. So it was probably the most intense praying I ever did. Mm-hmm. Did that for about 2 weeks. And then something very profound happened. I had a visual hallucination. I like to refer to it as a vision. Mm-hmm. Basically, I woke up about 2 o'clock one morning with the feeling of an intense presence in my room. Now, I can do a share screen and I can show a presentation of actually what it was that I encountered for you and your audience.
Sure.
So let me pull that up. It shows the interior of a room. So this is the room that I was in at the time. There's an entrance door, closet to the right, light switch on the wall there. There's a little like shelf that jutting out from the wall. And this is the room that I grew up in. This is the room of my childhood that I grew up in. So I mentioned I'd been enduring with schizophrenia for at least a year and a half or so now. I'm being attacked by something that's telling me that God doesn't exist. Give up your faith. It's just fairy tale. It's make-believe. You human beings, you have no soul. You have no spirit. You're just matter. You're just atoms. And I started praying to God, give me a sign that you exist. I need to know that there's something more legitimate going on here, that this is just madness in my head. So I woke up with a feeling like there was something in my room. I'm looking around, I'm not seeing anything. So now I'm lying on my bed and I'm looking up. And I see the square light fixture is there above me. Can you all see the square ceiling light fixture?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's the door. It didn't switch to the skylight fixture.
Is it the square skylight right now?
No.
Okay.
No, we have the doors.
Okay,
There's
I think
door
it
and
might take a while to catch up. Let's see if it changes. On my screen, I have the square ceiling light fixture.
No, it's not showing on ours. You got
Okay,
the light switch in the door.
Okay, let me do something
There you go. Now you got it.
Okay, I'll do it this way. This seems to work better sometimes. Okay, so
Oh, I did it, but you can do it.
I'll just do it manually. This will work just fine.
Yeah.
So I'm lying on my bed looking up. I see this square light ceiling fixture, and there's just a sense, a very strong sense, something's in the room with me. I don't know what it is, but I felt this presence. Very ominous. I don't, it might have been evil. I wasn't quite sure there, but I just felt this energy that something's in the room with me. And then all of a sudden, I see this kind of smoke seem to start coming in near the ceiling. Can you see a little bit of the smoke starting to form in the slide?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And more of the smoke is coming into the room. At first, I thought it was an electrical fire occurring in the light fixture, and I was almost ready to run out of the room. But then I realized, wait a second, that's not where the wires are in the ceiling light. And the smoke wasn't coming from the light fixture or the ceiling itself. It was coming from a plane about 6 inches to a foot or two below the level of the ceiling. And I'm watching more and more of this, what looked like a fog, a grayish smoke-like, cloud-like substance. It was kind of silverish, grayish, blackish coming into the room. And it moved the way, it didn't move like smoke. Have you ever dropped food coloring in water?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of moved the way food coloring would move through a glass of water. I don't know if it had sentience itself. And I wasn't sure what was going on yet, and it dawned on me, oh great, now I'm having a visual hallucination. Here it was, I'm diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder, or schizoaffective disorder, and now I'm starting to have a visual hallucination. I'm thinking, great, my schizophrenia is getting worse. I'm in bad shape here. But the other part of me is saying, okay, let's see what a schizophrenic brain has to show itself. Let's see where my schizophrenic mind goes. What is this hallucination going to be? So that was the scientist in me. That was the split mind, the observer, deciding to watch this whole thing. So more and more of the smoke or fog or cloud-like essence is coming into the room. And I'm more curious at this point. I'm seeing, okay, where's this going to go? I knew this was not normal reality. Where's this going to go? More and more of this fog or cloud, the cloud's getting larger in the room. And all of a sudden I start to see a kind of a portal or very dark opening in the middle of the cloud. It's kind of oblong looking. And I realize a lot of this smoke or fog is pouring out from the inside periphery of this opening, the portal. I could see the cloud-like substance pouring out from the inside circumference of this opening and filling up the room. The portal's getting bigger and bigger, or gateway. And then all of a sudden, I see two serpentine snake-like movements move from bottom to top within the portal. It was very dark looking in the portal. I couldn't see anything else, but I saw these snake-like movements, very clear, move. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? At first, I was like grateful that whatever this entity was with the snake-like tails, that it was on the other side of this portal. It wasn't in my room yet. That thought was premature. So I'm watching this thing kind of move in the portal. It appeared to be two tails is what I saw at first, and then it appeared to be one tail. And more of the cloud is filling up the room. The portal gateway became obscured as the cloud is becoming thicker and thicker, but I knew the portal gate was still there. It's almost like seeing a full moon behind the clouds. I could see portions of it every once in a while. And I knew this was not normal reality, but I wanted to see where this all goes. Then all of a sudden I started seeing the serpentine movements or snake-like movements within the cloud itself. And I was like, oh, great, this thing's in my room now. It's not just on the other side of the portal. It's actually entered into my room. I'm still not sure. I'm on the fence whether this was just a visual hallucination or if these things actually materialize within my room. I don't have any proof of its physicality, but I felt like these things had actually entered my room, that this wasn't just a visual hallucination. I still wasn't sure what it was or where it was going. So I'm watching the serpentine movements. Then all of a sudden, the serpentine movements are within the cloud itself, like something's building up here. I couldn't see any movements for a few moments. Then all of a sudden, this creature pops out of the cloud. And it had a mammalian head to it. I know it seemed to disappear, vaporize, or pulverize.
See, and that's one thing that schizophrenics have told me who are able to do this. If they send these voices love, it's like burning them with a blowtorch. I've heard that
I think that's
times.
also Sherry's. Yep, Sherry also shared that with us, and she also shared That's a Lie program, and also the love strategy to just. You
can get that That's a Lie program on my website at jerrymerzinsky.com under articles. So if you're hearing voices or if you're hearing intrusive thoughts, just go get that program off of there and put it to use, and it'll help a lot.
Yeah.
So I did not expect to survive this ordeal. I mean, I really thought that was going to be the end of my existence. I thought this creature was going to devour me or my soul or something like that. And then I realized I'm still alive. And I could still see the ceiling light on my ceiling. So I knew I was still in the room. That was my data point. That was my constant. The cloud was still there. The portal was still there, although the cloud was starting to dissipate slightly. I was thinking, okay, I survived this. This ordeal's over. But I kind of spoke too soon on that. Next thing I know, there's a different entity hovering overhead. This entity was more in the upper right-hand corner of my field of vision, whereas the previous serpentine entity with the lion-like face had disappeared at about 6 o'clock or so. This appeared about 2 or 3 o'clock. This entity was very different, though. I drew it as a kind of a white porcelain mask. I'm an engineer, not an artist, but this face was the most beautiful face I ever saw. It was sheer, undescribable beauty. That I remember. It seemed to be kind of illuminated, and it had these bronzish wing-like discharges of energy coming from behind it. It could have been 3 or 4 pairs of these. I was interpreting them as wings, but they almost also looked like discharges of like yellowish, bronzish, radiant energy, almost like the corona of the sun or like solar flares. And the wings are kind of hovering. They're moving back and forth. Sometimes it was over its face. Sometimes it was in different locations. I was ready to get up and run out of the room again at this point because I'm thinking, I'm a human being. This entity is not of this realm. This is something divine. I didn't feel worthy to even look at its face. It was so undescribably beautiful. But I kind of stayed there. I was very humbled by what I was seeing. And I'm just looking at it. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm thinking the previous entity had turned into something very hideous looking. I felt this entity, which had such extreme beauty, was going to do the same thing. I mean, after all, I'm in the schizophrenic state. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm not sure if I'm having just a visual hallucination or if this is a true visual vision occurring, a true paranormal experience of entities from other realms of existence. But I realized this entity, it wasn't aware of myself, because I remember I was looking at it, but it's almost like it was not aware that I was there. It was not aware where itself was located. There was I think a few minutes went by when I'm just kind of looking, waiting to see what was going to happen next, watching these wings flutter back and forth and this entity hovering overhead. Now, this is something I came across in the last few years. Again, I had this vision back in 1991. There was no internet. I wasn't into the occult. I avoided any type of recreational drugs like alcohol or marijuana because I wanted to face this stuff head on throughout my entire experience with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. I wanted to get my brain back. And I hated being on the low dose of Klonopin that I was on at the time. I hated having to rely on any sorts of pharmaceutical medications to gain my sanity and have my faculties in place. So I was trying to get off the medication. That was kind of my objective. But this is kind of what the face looked like, way of describing it. It was kind of white porcelain looking, very, very beautiful. And the lower left-hand corner is referred to as a seraphim, or sometimes a cherub, depending on what source you look at. But it's kind of a beautiful face. And then these kind of like wing-like looking appendages fluttering around it. And these entities are said to be very close to God in different biblical sources and other sources. I had no idea what this thing was. I mean, if I was going to have a hallucination of an angel, I would think that I would see some, beautiful woman with a halo over her head with wings flying around. I didn't know what this was. I wasn't aware of this sort of thing. So these are just some images kind of trying to represent what it is that I saw. Next thing I know, this entity opens its eyes and it's looking at me. Now, I drew the eyes without pupils. There might have been pupils. It might have had pupils, but I just remember they were kind of very dark pupils. And we're just staring at each other. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. The cloud is dissipating. The wings are still fluttering back and forth. And we're just staring, waiting to see what's going to occur. I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew this was not normal reality. I also knew who's going to believe me if I ever told anybody about this experience. I mean, here I am diagnosed with schizophrenic affective disorder. Nobody's going to believe me. Mm-hmm. And then it seemed like several moments, and all of a sudden the face smiled at me. I could even see dimples forming in the face. And the face was rather androgynous looking, but I felt like this entity was of a feminine nature. It was a humanoid face, a very humanoid face. The cloud has dissipated quite a bit at this point, but the portal's still there, or the gateway. And upon this entity smiling at me, it was a smile of grace. I just felt like waves of love, bliss, ecstasy come from this entity and enter my being. It was the most ecstatic experience I've ever had in my life. It's almost like it was letting me know everything's okay. I don't know if it was thanking me. I don't know if this entity had rescued me. I don't know if I had rescued it. I don't know if we've rescued each other. But I just knew that I was having feelings and sensations that I hadn't had for such a long time. Just floating in a sea of love, ecstasy, total bliss and joy. I started to have an out-of-body experience. I started to rise out of my body. And as I'm rising out of my body, I'm starting to merge with this entity. And this entity is kind of going back in reverse towards the portal where the other entity had come out of. And I'm merging with this entity in a state of total bliss and ecstasy. And just as I'm about to 100% merge with this entity, it's like we were becoming one being combined together. And just as I was about to 100% merge with this entity and become one with it and cross over the threshold into this portal with it, everything went gray. It's like I was put back to sleep. And then everything went dark. Like I was deliberately put back to sleep. It was almost like, when you go in for surgery and they give you anesthesia and they say count down backwards, 3, 2, 1, and then you're out. I felt myself just being put out.
Wow.
I woke up that morning in a state of religious shock. It's like, what just
I bet you were in shock. Yeah. That's an understatement, though.
I'm a logical engineer with a scientific mind. Mm-hmm. But this was not this. The scientific method cannot be applied to these things. I realized that this was a true, profound spiritual experience. Now, the fact I've been praying to God to give me a sign, and this is what occurs. So previously, these negative entities were telling me that God doesn't exist. Give it up. Your faith is pointless. There's no such thing as a supreme conscious or anything above. You human beings are worthless. And then this is what happens. It basically negated everything those negative entities were telling me over the past months. This is the point I would say I cross over from having faith in God to Gnosis, having had that experience. It was both ecstatic and terrifying at the same time, because this is not normal reality. But it was the start of my recovery. I'd say this is the point where I crossed over from being a mad person and kind of becoming a mystic. I was able to confront the voices over the coming months and stand up to them, and they faded. They eventually faded over the coming months. They got less and less, because it's kind of like, you lost your power over me. You gave yourself away. You revealed yourself. Now, I don't know if both entities were evil. I don't know if the first one was evil and the second one was benevolent. I don't know if I had somehow changed that first entity of the snake-like body into the second entity. I don't believe so. I believe that they were two separate entities. Now, that second entity, there's many ways of interpreting this stuff. That could have been the Aeon Sophia herself, the Gnostics often talk about. It could have been my guardian angel. It could have been my own soul. It could have been my future self. It could have been all of the above. But I felt like that second entity was something benevolent, because it changed my perspective on things. I was able to deal with the negativity. I was able to deal with the voices after that. That having that experience, that second entity, it gave me the will to live again. And I was able to rebuild myself as a human being and kind of get back on track in life. Now, I had no knowledge of Gnosticism, or I didn't know what this stuff was. And I was still in counseling at the time. I didn't tell my counselor about this hallucination that I had, because one, I didn't want to be put on more harder, heavier duty antipsychotropic drugs. I didn't want to be put on more intense medications. My objective was to get off the medications, to gain my own sanity back on to my own accord, my own methods. And the second reason was I didn't want her telling me it was just a hallucination and nothing more, because that vision, it returned my faith. It gave me a basis to rebuild myself. It was the only thing holding me together at that point in time. It was a foundation from which I could start coming back into having a career, a life, having a sense of a future. And then about 2020, I start reading about doing some religious research, trying to investigate this stuff. And I really didn't tell anybody about this experience until these more recent years, because I had to kind of try to figure out some of this stuff on my own. And I'm not 100% certain about all this stuff too. I have to keep a very open mind, because there's multiple ways of interpreting this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I did come to the conclusion that as human beings, there's something much more to just the material aspect of our body. We do seem to have a non-physical aspect to ourselves, a soul, a spirit, whatever one wants to call it. It restored my faith in God. As I said, it was actually, I no longer believe in God. I know there's a God. And I don't know if the most ultimate, highest essence of God, the Gnostics referred to it as the monad, allowed me to see this, to help me to recover. Some aspects of God, various Gnostic sects will describe God as being undefinable, unknowable, unfathomable. Like, God is just something that our ape-like brains just can't really comprehend. That's why we have to rely on the various emanations to interact with the divinity or the Godhead. The Gnostics refer to some of these as Aeons and Archons. Aeons being the better benevolent entities, and Archons being the negative, malicious entities. You can call some of these negative entities demons. You can call them jinn. And I was expecting to have more of these hallucinations, because I'm thinking my schizophrenia is getting worse. I never had a visual hallucination again in my life after that experience. So it was actually the turning point of my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So it's rather mystical in a sense. I was very fortunate to have had this experience, however terrifying and exhilarating it was. But just goes to show you, those with diagnosis of having schizophrenia, that there's something more profound going on. It's a shamanic experience. And this is coming from a logical, rational, scientific mind here. But I have to confess what I went through and what occurred. So schizophrenia does not have to be a life sentence. There are ways to treat it than just relying on the medications. It takes work. You have to work on yourself. You have to work on your psyche. There's various programs out there, such as the Mace Energy Method. There's the That's Alive program. There's the better aspects of some of the religions out there. There's so many different paths to the Godhead. And if God has elements of femininity, elements of masculinity, it's definitely an infinite source, whatever it is. And I use the word "it" not out of disrespect. It's just I don't have another descriptive vocabulary word to use to describe God. But if God is infinite source, the logic dictates that there would be infinite legitimate paths to accessing God, that it's not a finite amount of paths. So, Christianity can be used to access God. Islam can be used to access God. So the pagan religions can be used to access God. There's multiple paths to the Godhead. I think the most important thing, though, is you have to be pure enough in terms of putting forth healthy love, compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude to be able to interact with this essence of God, however we choose to define him, her, or it. And I found what these Archons or these demons try to do is they're very much into extremes, polarity. They're trying to polarize humanity. We have the extremes in politics going on. There's no room for middle ground. We have extremes of masculinity and extremes of femininity. And extremes are very toxic, no matter what they are, whether it's extreme masculinity or extreme femininity, whether it's extreme left, liberal, extreme conservative, right-wing. It's these extremes that are causing so much destruction out there in the reality that we live in. And I believe that these Archons or demons are trying to encourage those extremes because they don't want humanity to prosper. They don't want humanity to access the divine sparks within, the divinity within ourselves. And after having this cosmic confrontation, I've come to the conclusion that as human beings, we do have a legitimate role to play in the cosmos. We're just not necessarily sure where we are. We seem to be part ape, part angel. We have one foot in the material, physical world, and another foot in the spiritual divine realms. But
and I like that you mentioned the spiritual aspect of what schizophrenia, in other in other alternative treatments, they don't have these names. They don't call them these names, so it's very difficult, when people, hear, these, labels. But in different cultures, schizophrenia, the symptoms or the manifestation of what is called schizophrenia is usually seen as people with heightened spiritual abilities, actually.
Yeah. They turn them into shamans.
In a lot of African cultures, if someone is, not coping well with their gifts, then, a healer or somebody who is more equipped will come and help you balance and navigate you and understand your gifting, because it simply means, and I'm oversimplifying, that you are able to see beyond other realms and you are able to communicate outside of these realms naturally, but you're not aware of it or you don't know how to navigate that space. So they don't call you crazy or sick or this. They just okay, we need to help you.
You need training. I needed training.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. They don't call you, crazy now, No, they're okay, come on, we need to help you understand your gifting. And most of these people are seen as healers and other things. There's a long list, but they're not seen as crazy. They're seen as having difficulty or a challenge in understanding their gifts and navigating this physical realm with those heightened abilities and gifts per se. So,
I wish I knew of Carl Jung, and I wish I knew of Gnosticism at the time, and I wish I had a good shamanic healer to help me through this when this was all occurring. But would have made things a heck of a lot easier. But I approached it head on. But that's what gives it legitimacy too, because I wasn't coming from a spiritual aspect in terms of my background. I was a logical, rational, scientific engineer dealing with this stuff. So that should give it even more legitimacy to those that are listening that this stuff is demons and archons. It's real. It's very real.
They're very real.
I'm still searching truth. I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. I'm a perpetual student. I definitely continue to dabble in the spiritual arts, and you know, I know how much I don't know. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, don't we all? Okay, so I think this is a good place to end this. Anon, your story it's fascinating. I cannot even start to imagine what you were going through during this experience, observing all that. How long did this happen? How long was the...
Well, the last time I was on any medications for it was probably 1992, 1993. But the actual...
No, I mean the vision when you were experiencing...
Oh, it's tough because time definitely feels like it's distorted when you're undergoing these sense of altered realities. But I would say I probably felt like 15 minutes from start to finish. From 15 minutes, that's from when the serpentine entity first entered the room. I can even say 5 to 15 minutes. It wasn't an hours or anything like that, because I mean some stuff was happening pretty quickly. But yeah, I'd say between 5 to 15 minutes. But from when the time that the serpentine entity kind of entered the room where the clouds started to form, if I was to put a guess on it. But I definitely know that the amount of time I spent with the beautiful porcelain face entity was much longer than the time I spent encountering the entity with the lion-like face and the serpentine body.
Wow. Yeah.
And if I may, so what got me to this point and interacting with Jerry was I was doing a lot of search for religious truth and trying to understand things about how this world works, the multiple paths to the Godhead. So I wrote a book. It's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a website. It's astroxrising.com. And I'll send you a link to that for the show notes. But this,
yes, please. Mm-hmm.
It was writing this book that kind of helped me get to this point. It was my search for truth, and it doesn't get specifically into my schizophrenic days, but there are some hidden messages within it. But I think it'll help any seeker on their path to try and raise their consciousness to a higher state, to try and have a little bit more illumination in one's life.
And we've got this one that Sherry and I wrote.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. If you're interested in how we came to the conclusion that these voices were actual entities and not hallucinations, the path is in here. And I want to urge any of you who are thinking about taking psychiatric drugs, who don't absolutely need it, to go to www.causisminstitute.com and find yourself a causism practitioner there. They will get rid of the cause of your psychological problems in most cases. I mean, completely gone. They're not just treating the symptoms like psychiatry and psychology are.
Yeah. And you know what I think, Jerry, the biggest challenge we have today is people are just not aware at how many remedies and options there are out there, because we're just taught there's just one way, to treat something, but that's not the case. So maybe next time we'll talk about the MACE treatment, if you have time, because I think also there's a lot of, I don't want to say, they think there's that woo stuff, because we've been trained and programmed that this is it. It's the doctor, the pill, that's it. One way, linear. But there are other ways that work, and they're not woo-woo. They do work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if it works, try it. And, some methods will work for some people, not for others. But start at the lowest possible hierarchy. I think it's better to go and try the MACE energy method before resorting to these destructive pills that just tranquilize the brain. Now, start out at the lower echelons. You might be able to resolve some of those issues and heal the trauma and get rid of any voices that you're hearing through least amount of having to destroy your brain, I guess.
Yeah, with long-term use, those antipsychotic drugs actually destroy your brain and your peripheral nervous system. They've done autopsies on psych patients in state hospitals and found their brains were shrunk like walnuts. And when they published that, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went nuts and said, no, it's a schizophrenia did that. But the researchers started feeding these drugs to monkeys and rats, and the same effect happened. it actually destroys your central nervous system. So not only are they not curing anything, they're causing damage.
Yeah, yeah. When you mentioned that in the first interview we had, Jerry, I looked that up. Everybody should look up that research of the brain and what the medicine does to the brain. It's really, really eye-opening. You will think twice before you do that, because it's all out there. Yeah, but when you mentioned that, I looked it up, and yeah, I learned a lot. Let's just say that. Yeah.
We also got on our website, again, at jerrymerzinsky.com, go to articles. There's the That's a Lie program that will help everybody. If they have intrusive thoughts, just put that program to use.
Yeah. And I think people need to move away from, the skepticism and, without doing the research, because there's enough evidence to a lot of the things we're talking about. You just have to want to learn and, find out. And yeah, and anyway, we are all built differently, so it's clear that there's no cookie cutter, there's no one size fits all. So Jerry, I'd like you to have the last word, and then I'll hand it over to Anon to have the last word as well before we head out.
Yeah, just understand that all thoughts that come into your mind don't belong to you. Emanuel Swedenborg said none of your thoughts belong to you. Your brain is like a radio receiver. It picks up the frequency that you're at, and the name of the game is to increase that frequency. And like Anon said, it's through spiritual practice. I mean, you have to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
I think if I were to say anything, it's just if anyone's dealing with schizophrenia themselves or has relatives or friends, the very first step to healing is to recognize that those negative voices, those negative thoughts, they're coming from outside external entities of you. It is not you.
Right.
Once the schizophrenic patient makes that determination, that's when the healing process begins. Because then they're able to say, okay, this is not my own mind. This is something else. I got to fight this. I can confront it. I can win this.
Yeah, so you're not fighting against yourself. Like you have like an enemy within your own head. You have now identified an external enemy that you can fight against, and psychiatry doesn't push that at all. It's like, yeah, your brain is broken, you're sick, you got to take drugs for the rest of your life. You're now a schizophrenic. It's a grave disservice to the human race.
Yeah, it is. And we all know, Jerry and Anon, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? So maybe we should look differently, somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely.
So to all our listeners, today's guests were Jerry Merzinsky and Anon. These were our smart guests talking about a very important topic. All their information will be in the description, so make sure you take a peek, browse around, and I bet you will learn a lot. So I thank you all for stopping by, and until next time, goodbye.